Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. Let's go ahead and get right into our true crime case for today. Now, our narrative unfolds in Houston, Texas, and it's known as a city rich with a lot of fascinating details. Houston proudly hosts one of the world's largest medical complex, the Texas Medical Center, which encompasses numerous hospitals and leading healthcare institutions. Now, this makes it a global hub for medical innovation and patient care. The city is also known for its vibrant culture, boasting a remarkable diverse population where there are over 145 languages spoken. If you're from Houston, shout out to you. Now, although Houston is known for a lot of things, it's famously known for being the space city, largely due to the of NASA's Johnson Space Center, where iconic moments in space exploration, including the first words from the moon, originated. Say it with me. Houston, we have a problem. Despite its many accolades and contributions to medicine, culture, and space exploration, Houston faces economic disparities. The city's economic landscape is varied, leading to significant differences in prosperity between urban and suburban areas. This creates challenges that continue to shape the lives of many of its residents. And one of those residents that faced economic hardships was Lydell Grant. He spent his formative years in the southwest neighborhoods of Houston, striving for a brighter future despite the challenges that surrounded him. But at the age of 16, he faced a pivotal setback, a conviction for robbery that resulted in a 10-year prison sentence. And at the age of 16, he had to serve the entire term. When he was released in 2004, he was determined to turn his life around completely. And following his release, Lydell channeled his energy into music. He was an aspiring rap artist and wanted to eventually become a prominent figure. And when I say prominent figure, I mean a mogul. He really aspired to become somebody like a Jay-Z or Diddy, regardless of your current opinion of Diddy. He was a mogul who was able to pivot from music to becoming a liquor connoisseur and then eventually a businessman and also a TV star. And that is something Lydell wanted to do. And he felt like if he poured his experience and his hopes into the art form of rap, he would eventually be able to become the mogul he always wanted, to being able to pivot into different directions in his career choices. And he was seeking not only a personal transformation, but a measure of redemption. You know, that rags to riches story that we all love to hear here in America. And everything was going well for him. But we know that's not the end of our story because we wouldn't have a story if it ended there. And on December 15th of 2010, as Lydell was making his way through the Houston area, he was stopped by police officers. And he thought that it would just end in him getting a ticket for a minor traffic violation. But instead, Lydell was told that he was going to be taken downtown to the police station. And he wasn't given a whole lot of information. They said they would explain everything once he was there, and if he cooperated, he would soon know what was going on. He still felt that it would be minor, but once he was there, detectives did inform him that he was going to be transferred to the homicide division and was informed that he was the primary suspect in a murder that took place just 4 days prior. Now, at first, Lydell thought he was in an episode of prank, and Ashton Kutcher was going to pop out any moment and tell him that this was all a joke and he could go home. But they didn't. And he couldn't understand how he could have been in something so serious. Like a murder, he would never murder anybody. He was well on to his path of changing his life around. In order to come forward, we're going to have to go back in time. 4 days prior, on December 11th, 2010, which was a Friday, 28-year-old Aaron Scheerhoorn was out in Houston and he ran up to a group outside of a nightclub. It was a group of bouncers and other patrons. And when he ran up on them, he was out of breath and he unzipped his jacket to show them that he was bloodied. He had recently been stabbed. And before he could get any words out on what happened, moments later, they saw another man who seemed to be the perpetrator brandishing a knife. And Aaron was scared. The bouncers and other patrons are trying to just digest the scene in front of them. What's going on? They have a person who's bloody, another person who has a knife, and they're unsure of what to do. They don't know if this is just a fight that broke out. Should they involve themselves with this? Was this a lover's spat? They had no idea, and they didn't know if they should help or simply back away. And Aaron soon realized that this group of people wasn't going to help him. And so he decided to help himself. So he fled the scene, hoping to get away from the perpetrator with the knife. And that's when the perpetrator followed him into a nearby parking lot and attacked him from behind and began viciously stabbing him inside of that parking lot. Onlookers from the nightclub watched in astonishment. And I guess they finally got enough sense to finally reach out to 911 to get help for Aaron. Aaron later was taken to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Now, investigators, once at the scene, were trying to digest what happened because the perpetrator fled the scene before investigators were there. Investigators had to rely on the testimony and the eyewitness account of everyone who was there. Now, I want to tell you that when investigators began to talk to everyone, they had varying accounts, which is not surprising. I mean, different people see different things. They were able to build based on the eyewitness account, the perpetrator, and the physical description. According to those witnesses, they said that it was a black male. He was around 6'2" to 6'7". And once they got all of that information, they eventually left the scene, hoping to find their perpetrator. Later that same night, a nightclub employee ended up calling investigators back to the nightclub because he claimed that he was one of those eyewitnesses who saw the entire attack on Aaron. And he wanted to let them know that he just saw the same perpetrator come back to the nightclub and he was in the parking lot. So he gave them the physical description of the perpetrator once again, but also gave a detailed description of the car that the perpetrator was believed to be driving. So, based on that description, detectives traced the VIN number of that car and they got a hit on the owner of the vehicle. It was Lydell Grant. So they run his background information and noted that he was an ex-con. Now, we've talked extensively about the protocol of investigators. And if they have someone who they believe is suspicious, they typically run their background to see if they have a criminal background. And if they do, if it has something to do with the violent nature of whatever crime or what crime they may be investigating at the time. Now, they did this for Lydell, and they felt that while he didn't have anything violent in his past, he did have a criminal history. And that was enough for them to come back to the nightclub and have a conversation with that employee. Along with them, they brought a photographic lineup that included Lydell's picture. And according to this employee, he picked out Lydell as the suspect responsible for Aaron Scheerhoorn's death. Now, I already told you there were several witnesses on scene who said that they saw the murder. Out of the witnesses present, only 7 claimed to have seen clearly the assailant. They got all of those witnesses down to the station and they presented to them a photographic lineup very similar to the one that they gave to the employee from the nightclub. And 6 of those witnesses identified Lydell as the perpetrator. Following these identifications, the investigators felt like they had their guy. It was Lydell. He was arrested. But from the outset, Lydell adamantly maintained his innocence. He stated he did not know Aaron, and he did say that he was in the area that night. but insisted that he had simply been bar hopping in the area, but he was with a friend the entire night. And his friends supported his account. Now, normally, once the investigators have an alibi and they substantiate it, they're well on their way to clearing the suspect. But this isn't what happened. Despite having his alibi substantiated, authorities remained skeptical. They were convinced that they could find forensic evidence that linked Lydell to the crime. Now, investigators turned their focus to the physical evidence. What did they have? Well, Aaron had scratched his attacker during the struggle, and police gathered DNA samples from beneath Aaron's fingernails, hoping for a match. But but I have to tell you, Lydell didn't have any scratch marks or injuries on his person when they examined him. But convinced, the state went ahead and processed the DNA evidence. And when they analyzed their findings, they were unable to affirm that Lydell had anything to do with the attack because the results were inconclusive. So they couldn't tie Lydell to Aaron's attack. But with the forensic evidence faltering, prosecutors knew they had to throw that out. They couldn't include that during trials. They relied heavily on eyewitness identification and charged Lydell with first-degree murder. In December of 2012, Lydell stood trial for the murder of Aaron Scheerhoorn. And as I said previously, what ended up convicting Lydell was the eyewitness accounts. And he was found guilty of first-degree felony murder and sentenced to life in prison. Usually, we would be done. 12 minutes in, we're done, y'all. No, we're not. Because for Lydell, the verdict was not the end of the story. He refused to accept defeat because he was innocent, and he resolved to prove his innocence from behind bars. Day after day, he pored over case law and legal precedents, searching for any means to overturn his conviction and reclaim his life. He was determined not to let the confines of his cell define his future. Now, Lydell approached each day with the discipline of a dedicated student. He gained a deeper understanding of legal processes. He became increasingly aware of advancement in forensic science, particularly DNA technology. He learned that since his trial, DNA analysis had become more sophisticated and capable of identifying individuals with far greater accuracy. And this realization sparked a hope, the possibility that the evidence collected between Aaron's fingernails might reveal the truth and vindicate him. Now, driven by this hope, Lydell resolved to fight, and he sent several letters to the Innocence Project. And after they reviewed his case, they felt that he had what it took in order for them to take on his case. Attorney Mike Weir was the head of the Innocence Project and was one of the people who worked on Lydell's case, along with some of his law students. And at the time where Lydell finally got the approval from the Innocence Project so that they could take on his case and finally vindicate him, he had spent 6 years in prison. And I think this speaks to the hope that Lydell had, but honestly, the accountability he had and the ownership that he took on ensuring that his freedom didn't depend solely on the Innocence Project's efforts, but it depended largely on himself. He was the person who spent over 6 years working on his case file, finding out new information, and being diligent and committed to sending that information into the Innocence Project until he was able to hear the answer that he was longing for. Yes, we'll take on your case. Now, upon reviewing the case, Attorney Weir and his students focused on the eyewitness account. And he recognized that eyewitness accounts are very unreliable. And I want to talk to you guys about some of those factors and review them with you on why eyewitness accounts can be unreliable. Number one, the impact of memory distortion. The witness error is a primary cause of wrongful conviction. The American Psychological Association estimates that 1 in 3 eyewitnesses make an erroneous identification. Mistaken identification by eyewitnesses play a role in 61% of 375 convictions overturned by DNA evidence, and that's as of January 2020. So you know that at the time that attorney Mike Ware took the case, those numbers were either comparable or maybe even higher. Furthermore, approximately 72% of cases where innocent individuals were convicted and later exonerated by DNA testing involved mistaken identification testimony from highly confident witnesses. Now, this type of misidentification is the single greatest cause of wrongful convictions in the U.S., contributing to over 75% of more than 230 DNA based exoneration. That fact alone is where we can stop, but we have to keep going, guys. Number two, the influence of suggestive questioning and leading questions. The way questions are phrased by investigators and how lineups are conducted influence witness recollection. This phenomenon is known as the misinformation effect. It occurs when post event information, such as misleading questions, contaminates memories. Studies have shown that exposing witnesses to misleading information can lead them to remember things that simply did not happen. Number three, influence of cross-racial identification errors. Eyewitness identification of individuals from a different race are on average less accurate than those of the same race. Experimental research suggests that an eyewitness attempting to identify a stranger is over 50% more likely to make a misidentification when the stranger and eyewitness are of a different race. This factor may contribute to the disproportionate number of minorities wrongfully convicted. Consistent with the findings, approximately 1/3 of wrongful convictions uncovered by DNA analysis nationwide have involved white individuals misidentifying Black individuals. In Lydell's case, only one of the eyewitnesses who testified against him was Black. The rest of the witnesses who testified were white. Number four, effect of stress and trauma on eyewitness recall. High levels of stress or anxiety during a crime can significantly impair eyewitness memory. Severe stress generally hinders memory for the event, although moderate stress might enhance memory for central aspects. Elevated stress can also lead to increased confidence in witness recollection without a corresponding increase in accuracy, though. It poses a challenge in courtrooms where confidence is often seen as an indicator of reliability. Number five, which is our last factor that increases eyewitness error, is the unrecoverable nature of memory over time. Human memory, we can all agree, is not like video footage. It can degrade and can be influenced by outside sources over time. Now, studies have shown that memory accuracy and confidence levels tend to decrease as the retention interval. The time between witnessing an event and recalling it increases. Amongst the factors that we've discussed, Attorney Ware appealed to three of the factors. The influence of suggestive questioning. He suggested that investigators were so locked in on Lydell being the killer that they may have suggested to the eyewitnesses during questioning that Lydell was their guy. He also said that cross-racial identification error played a part, as well as the unrecoverable nature of memory in its entirety. DNA acts as an impartial form of evidence. And while there was skepticism regarding the reliability of the eyewitness account, it was also important to retest that DNA evidence in this case. The raw data was sent to Dr. Angie Ambers, who analyzed the alleles. Now, alleles are variations in a DNA marker. You know, we have that stretch of DNA that you see oftentimes depicted, and there are markers that are called alleles. Now, in the raw data that was sent to Dr. Angie Ambers, there was a mixture that contained 26 alleles. none of which match Aaron or Lydell Grant. So the fact that the state came back with an inconclusive result really made Dr. Angie perturbed. She wondered why, because her results didn't come back inconclusive. When she called attorney Mike Ware up and told him the good news, he was excited about moving forward with the appeal process. But she informed him that the test that she ran was a manual interpretation, but it wasn't the standard method of testing. And she claimed that they would get better results if they use artificial intelligence to interpret the raw data information that she already analyzed. Now, this approach is considered impartial because it relies on the artificial intelligence to run the numbers and definitively say it is not geared to anyone's opinion. The company that Dr. Angie suggested was Cybergenetics. They use a DNA software called True Allele to help them identify the remains of those who were found during 911. In essence, True Allele takes the data, the crime lab then generates an evidence sample, and they determine, based on that low level of mixed DNA, they find the genome type of that sample. Cybergenetics did just that in the sample found underneath Aaron's nails. It revealed that there was no way Lydell Grant's DNA was found in that sample. And the odds of his DNA being found in that sample, 1 in 10 trillion. Try counting up that high. The most promising portion of this case for me was not the fact that they were able to definitively rule Lydell out as the perpetrator, but they were then able to run that DNA through CODIS, and they got a hit. The DNA belonged to a man named Jamarco Carter. He was a year younger than Lydell, and they had comparable height and weight. They didn't resemble each other, folks. They found out that Jamarco left Houston shortly after the attack on Aaron, and he went to Atlanta, where he was involved in a violent crime where a knife was also used. So when they were equipped with this information, they go and they find Carter. Carter confesses to the murder after they revealed they had his DNA. Investigators are unsure why Carter stabbed Aaron Scheerhoorn, but Attorney Ware and Lydell are just happy that the perpetrator was caught and that in 2021, after 9 years of being in prison, Lydell was eventually released. Many have their own theories on why law enforcement believe they were led down the rabbit hole of choosing Lydell as their suspect. And they claim that the scene was very chaotic and that witnesses may have been drinking and they may have believed they knew something that they truly didn't. They also said they may have intentionally or unintentionally led the eyewitnesses to believe that it was Lydell. But since then, Houston PD has changed the way they do their lineup, even their photographic lineups. So they do a double blind lineup where the witnesses don't know any of the pictures or any of the people they're looking at, and they have to include people that are not a part of the crime. But also, the person who conducts the lineup can't have anything to do with the case. Regardless, Lydell remained very humble after being released from prison and exonerated. Now, usually this is where our story would end. I mean, it was wrapped up very nice and neat with a bow. Lydell was out of prison in 2021. However, because Lydell was wrongfully imprisoned, he became eligible for compensation under the Tim Cole Act. Now, the state formulas included $80,000 for each year of wrongful imprisonment, plus annuity payments for the rest of his life. And he was receiving those payments. That was until April of 2023. Lydell was involved in a minor traffic collision with 33-year-old Edwin Arevalo. Authorities alleged that Grant shot Arevalo multiple times through his windshield and fled the scene. and he murdered Edwin. Lydell was identified from surveillance footage and arrested shortly after. He was arraigned on a new murder charge, and his bond was set to $1 million. As of today, he's still in jail awaiting his trial. But because he has picked up a new murder charge, what does that mean? Well, he'll still continue to get paid. But if he is convicted of the murder of Edwin Arevalo, then those payments will stop. Takeaway. This case is unusual in nature because we have never done a case about the innocence of people who are wrongfully convicted. While one half of me is excited that Lydell was able to get the vindication he rightfully deserved, and I was very impressed by his hope, his passion, and his accountability in taking the reins of his own life and orchestrating the ultimate vindication of the charge that he received. I'm also very disheartened that at the end of this case, where so much discrimination was involved and the underdog ended up winning, he continued to make some very heinous mistakes that were unrecoverable. I mean, you can't get Edwin Arevalo's life back. And far too often, we allow things in life to get under our skin. And when you think about it, they were involved in a traffic collision, and it was an incident of road rage. If I do hear an update on this case and the trial, I definitely will tell you guys. But more than anything this week, I need for you guys to tell me what you think about this case. Had you heard of it? If you're a Houstonian, this case made national news, but it wasn't a case I was familiar with. Let me know what your thoughts are. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.